Hey there, everyone. Ervin here with a breakdown for the hottest topic of August the flamethrowers. The original design of the support flamethrower has come under fire in the escalation of freedom, losing the key feature that made it popular for half a year. With the addition of the Flam 66 Torture primary variant and the P72 Crisper sidearm variant, though, I thought this would be a great opportunity to look at all three of these weapons together and figure out if they really are as bad as the nerf to fire's abilities would dictate. The answers might actually surprise you, so let's take a look at their technical specifications, target effectiveness, and damage breakpoints to find out. As is the case with all of my breakdowns, all testing and opinions are performed and derived from difficulty 10 Super Helldive, giving you the most accurate information on how the gear holds up in the super endgame. Now, first, let's get the controversial design out of the way. Previously, the flamethrower would spew a steady stream of visible fuel that was ignited by the pilot light in a straight, recoilless stream that would be extinguished when firing through water. Now it lacks this stream, instead, spewing gouts of flames outward, unextinguished by water somehow, with a strong recoil effect, forcing you to pull down constantly to get the flamethrowers on target. This doesn't look nor feel as good, but this isn't why we're here, and Arrowhead is very aware of our grievances with the changes, so hopefully this part of my breakdown doesn't age well. Now, aesthetics aside, let's get into the real statistics behind these weapons. All three of these weapons are incredibly similar, hence me attempting to break them all down at the same time. Range wise, the Flamer has 22 meters of range, the Torture 18 meters, and the Crisper 23 meters of range. When it comes to dealing damage, however, the weapons all only deal their maximum damage when utilized at point blank, regardless of maximum range. Keep this in mind for when we get to the breakpoints, as this factor will be important for some of the enemies, as the damage fall off begins immediately and scales linearly down to zero by the end point. This means you'll only get the full damage listed within the first 7 meters of the Flamer's range and the first 9 and 11.5 meters of the Torture and Crisper. It's also interesting that the sidearm has the most range of the three, with the primary having the least. Regardless, all three generally lack range and force you into situations where you are forced to trade hits with the enemy on a regular basis, due to them lacking any form of stagger or pushing value, leaving you with no crowd control capabilities when utilizing these weapons. I suggest you remember which key or button is your melee, because you will be likely forced to use it often in the interest of saving your health and stims. The pilot light takes half a second to ignite as well before you can actually begin firing any of these weapons, which is a delay long enough to get you killed in close quarters combat. So typically, you're always going to want to maintain a sweet spot of distance from the target, despite our short range otherwise. This pilot light will burn for 12 seconds if unused, so make sure to keep your flamethrower lit and ready to go by tapping it in between fights. Getting into the ammo for the flamethrowers, this is also more complicated than normal. The support flamer has 4 spare canisters of fuel, each canister containing 1,024 units of fuel, which will sustain for 12.8 seconds of sustained fire. The primary Torture, funny enough, gets 6 spare canisters, each filled with 720 units of fuel, and lasts for 10 seconds of sustained fire, meaning it actually has more fuel per resupply than the support weapon does due to having 2 additional canisters. Even if the DPS ends up being significantly lower, this bit is very strange to me. The secondary Crisper gets 4 spare canisters just like the support weapon, but they are very small in comparison, only holding 296 units of fuel and expending it all after only 3.7 seconds of sustained fire. The fleeting amount of uptime versus reloading time you get with the Crisper leaves a lot to be desired here, as it's very rare as a result of this you feel you've accomplished anything of significance by the time your canister has been expended, unlike with the other two weapons. Not a great start for a weapon competing with a grenade pistol in your loadout. If there was one intriguing novelty about the Crisper, however, it would be that you can fire this weapon one handed while kiting without suffering as much momentum loss as you do with two-handed weapons, allowing it to be used to great effect for the very short amount of time it lasts for kiting. The lack of stagger and range, however, unfortunately leaves this point very moot. At least it looks really funny, like you're spraying some bug spray on the enemy. Armor penetration wise, all three of these weapons are class 3 or medium penetration, even the support weapon, strangely, meaning all of these weapons have the same exact target effectiveness, making this breakdown a lot easier as a result. Medium penetration is about as good as it gets as far as primary weapons are concerned, but only medium penetration for a support weapon is, on the contrary, about as bad as it gets, sharing penetration level with the standard MG43, and only beating out the stalwart as far as support weapon penetration is concerned. Getting into the damage these weapons deal, it's different to say the least. The support flamer deals 3 damage per tick, while the torture and crisper deal 2 damage per tick. Thankfully, things are not too incredibly complicated thanks to them doing an equal amount of durable damage. The complication comes in when you take tick rate into account. The support flamer fires 200 ticks, dealing 600 damage per second. The Torture, however, puts out only 100 ticks, dealing a very low 200 damage per second, while the Crisper sidearm strangely puts out 150 ticks, dealing 300 damage per second. As you would expect, the support flamer does the most of the three, but I have to say it's very bizarre L for the Crisper sidearm to be capable of putting out more DPS than the primary Torture. Thankfully, this won't matter too much with how you want to use this weapon. More on that later. Now, the raw DPS of all three of these weapons is astronomically low compared to most other weapons in the game. For context, the direct DPS of the Torture is equal to the sidearm dagger laser pistol, and the support flamer is actually the third lowest support DPS in the game, only above the laser cannon and arc thrower in this metric. This is pretty yikes. Thankfully, this is not a death sentence for this gear, however, as unlike its piddly raw DPS, the durable DPS is actually middle of the pack, with the support flamethrower beating out the MG43 and stalwart for durable damage per second. The 200 durable DPS of the torture still manages to beat out a good third of the other primaries in this metric, and the crisper much the same. So, as far as durable enemies are concerned, such as alpha commanders with their 70% durable light armored heads, these weapons actually kind of cook. We, of course, also have to now take into account the burning debuff these weapons inflict, as we've only thus far covered their raw damage and not the separate damage over time debuff they cause in addition. This is the same for all weapons, as we've talked about in our cookout breakdown. Every application of burn restarts the burn duration, but does not stack, burning for 2.67 seconds, dealing a total of 134 or 150 damage depending on if the game misses a tick or not. For simplicity's sake, though, let's assume it doesn't and go with 150 raw damage and 75 durable damage per burn with an armor penetration level of 4. This is the case for all fire weaponry except the burns inflicted by stratagems when you have the enhanced combustion ship module upgrade. This module brings the support flamer's fire damage over time effect up to 187 raw damage and 93 durable damage per application. Keep in mind, however, that this damage only ever applies to the main health pool of our enemies, and not to the part that you're hitting in particular, meaning this damage is completely meaningless unless you are eliminating the enemies through the center mass of the target. Due to the nature of the way flamethrowers function in Helldivers 2, in most situations, I'm actually going to end up advising you to attempt to apply your actual beams of fire to the target's body and not a limb or head to take advantage of this additional damage. However, we will cover this in detail with the breakpoints. It's also very important that we account for the fact that you can burn the ground to deal this damage to enemies as well, and every portion of flames emitted to the ground by your weapon will reapply that damage over time effect to the enemy as they pass through it. This in turn means that we have an additional way to deal damage beyond our effective range if we preemptively spray the ground in front of us with portions of flame as the enemy approaches. We can actually deal the full 56 raw damage and 28 durable damage per second for the entirety of the duration the enemies pass through this wall of fire. I've named this tactic Scorched Earth for further reference, and trust me when I say this strategy is vital to enjoying your time with, at the very least, the torture. Now, breakpoints are a tricky subject, if I'm being honest, when it comes to the flamethrower, because if I tell you it takes 1/7 of a second to roast a scavenger, that's probably not the most useful information in the world. So instead, I'm going to talk about what methods will result in the most convenient and optimal eliminations for each enemy going through with the Terminids. So, scavengers, hunters, and hive guards are all going to be best dealt with utilizing the previously mentioned scorched earth method. Scavengers will be dead within just 2 seconds of passing through the fire and will burn out should they receive even a singular application. The hunters burn out from this should they stay within the scorched earth for even half a second, as they barely have enough main health pool to survive one burn application. And the hive guards are a special case. Hive guards, while you can melt them down yourself in just a few seconds with any of these flamethrowers using the actual streams, these intelligent individuals register the burning damage underneath them as incoming fire, causing their AI to hunker down in it like they've just begun nesting for the spring until they slowly die from it. So basically, all of these enemies are completely invalidated if you lead them through a wall of fire leading up to your position, and you should probably use this regularly to avoid close encounters with hunters, as anytime they manage to make it within 10 meters of us while holding a flamethrower, maybe one or two will be fine, but any more than that, you're likely not going to be able to keep up just because you lack area of effect, point blank raw DPS, and stagger. Shriekers are a little tricky with the flamethrowers, but if you manage to light them up as they begin to dive at you, they are pretty much trivialized, being burned down in roughly half the burn damage over time alone. So, while these are annoying to swat away, they are typically a non issue overall unless your team doesn't destroy their nests before entering those 160-meter spawning radius, in which case, they might cause you some trouble. Warriors are the first enemy we have to worry about hitting with our actual flamethrowers, as they have 325 body health, and while the normal warriors will likely never survive your scorched earth, the alpha warriors certainly will and are very dangerous to our gameplay loop of kiting away and setting up firewalls, as they can not only close distance but accelerate if we put our beam on them directly after their weak little heads pop off, leaving us with a death charge to deal with. My advice is to either continue kiting, reapplying the damage over time directly to the Alpha Warriors, or to turn the gas on, take the heads off, and then melee them back as the death charge closes with you, leaving them to bleed out. Alpha commanders are a bit of a nuisance to deal with, as their 800 health pool is going to make our Scorched Earth strategy a bit difficult. While you might be able to keep them in the flames for the 20 plus seconds that it takes to base this turkey, this is definitely not the first time that you should consider turning on the gas and melting their face off. This takes between half a second and a second with the support flamer, 1.5 seconds to 3 seconds with the torture, and a second to 2 seconds with the crisper. I don't really recommend using the crisper for this due to this being more than half a canister per alpha commander, but the other two flamethrowers can easily spare the ammo to take these guys on head to head. Stalkers are downright scary for flamethrowers and are just not ideal for these. They move way too fast to set up the scorched earth and are on you before you can even light the pilot light. While you can burn them down in under 2 seconds utilizing the flamethrower itself through the body, the torture and the crisper have virtually no hope of doing the same. In all three cases, I recommend pulling a separate weapon able to handle this threat better, preferably with some stagger, as they are very likely to kill you if a pack comes upon you while you're holding nothing but a flamethrower to stop them, no matter which one it is. Biospewers have enough main health at 750 to tank their way through a firewall or two, and their heads are low enough to the ground that the rising recoil-esque effect of the flamethrowers make it very difficult to actually keep a stream of fire on their heads. Instead, it's typically going to be much easier to attempt to focus your fire on the main body, which can be popped within 2 to 4 seconds of being exposed to the support flamethrower on average, within 6 to 12 seconds for the torture, which I do not recommend for this task, and the crisper unfortunately fails this test, taking more than a canister on average to take one of these guys down, making the Biospewer among the most painful for all but the support flamethrower to handle when it comes to this category. And even then, having to get this close to an acid spewing monster is rarely ending pleasantly. Repeatedly setting them alight and kiting is going to be the best and go to option when it comes to the crisper and torture, while the flamethrower can dance with the acid spitters if you're up for it. Now we finally made our way to talking about the infamous chargers, which all weapons are balanced against, it seems. Even with the nerf to the leg meta, you can actually still take chargers down very reliably with the support flamethrower and a stun grenade, giving you access to their rears, burning them out within just 2 to 4 seconds of exposed fire. Remember to drag down hard, as the flames aren't going to do anything if they manage to creep over the top part of the carapace, and it'll go pop, entering a terminal bleed out in no time. As for the Torture and the Crisper, they don't really stand a chance of making this viable, as the DPS is simply too low, requiring too many stun grenades or rodeo shows to be worthwhile. But the support flamethrower remains a more than viable option for taking these big fellas down, even if all fire damage over time effects are completely nullified against chargers. Bio Titans, well, you can pop the sacks within 4 to 12 seconds of exposure from any of these weapons at point blank range, but I want to advise you to never bother doing this and instead opt for the tried and true method of baiting them within a 500 kg bomb or orbital precision strike for one shot kills instead, as flamethrowers are just not built for this guy. Impalers are interesting. Their heads are only armor class 1, and we do just as much durable damage as we do raw damage. So the fact that they have 75% durability doesn't really mean anything to these flamethrowers, but the 1700 health pool sure does. The support flamer takes between 3 and 6 seconds to melt the impaler's face off, while the torture need not apply, taking a staggering 9 to 18 seconds to get the job done, requiring a reload in between. Same as the noisy cricket, I mean Crisper, which unfortunately can't compete with the big dogs whatsoever, needing to expend 4.5 to 9 seconds and 2 reloading animations, expending up to 3 canisters just to kill one of these things. Definitely a case where you need not ask if you can, but if you should. Or again, 500 kg bomb, I'm just saying. That does it for the Terminids, so how about the automatons? Yeah, no, don't take flamethrowers to the automatons unless you want to have a bad time. As you probably expected when you began this video, if you're familiar with this channel, I won't be wasting your time with how poorly flamethrowers with barely 20 meters of range fare in an open conflict with heavy devastators able to shoot you from 500 meters comfortably with laser guided accuracy. Bringing flamethrowers to automatons is a lot like bringing a knife to a gunfight, and this video isn't about how terrible throwing knives are, so let's give these guys a no out of 10 and move on to the results. That does it for our breakpoints. So, how good are the flamethrowers really? Well, going through them one at a time, in my opinion, the Crisper is pretty terrible. It has no nest closing utility, so in my mind, it really can't compete with the grenade pistol in this regard. And its lack of ammunition, stagger, and range make it very difficult for me to ever want to pull this out and use it instead of continuing to utilize my primary, no matter what it is, really. I can't really find any niche that I would prefer this weapon unless I wanted to mix in the Scorched Earth strategy with, say, the Blitzer and stagger them back into the flames produced by my sidearm, but even then, the Blitzer would likely kill all of those enemies on its own damage, and the Crisper runs out of ammo far too quickly to be utilized regularly for Scorched Earth or killing anything, really, leaving its only novelty that it looks a little bit funny and kind of like bug spray when you use it one handed, which is at least enough for me to give it a 3 out of 10. Now, the Torture, while it has the least DPS of the three, it does manage to still have middle of the pack durable DPS for a primary, and the long lasting canisters and maximum spares allow it to be utilized for area denial quite well via the Scorched Earth tech, and otherwise can burn enemies down through damage over time effect alone when needed, skipping around the fact that its actual raw damage is next to nothing on its own. Surprisingly, when utilized well, that actually makes the Torture a solid pick when fighting the Terminids, especially if you pair it up with a support weapon that can cover its weakness to Stalkers and Alpha Commanders, like the autocannon. I award the Torture a 6 out of 10. Usable. Last, we've got the support flamethrower. Has it truly fallen from grace? Well, no, not really. It's more inconvenient than ever to kill a charger, but it still gives me quite a few charger kills per resupply, which is what I want from my support weapon at the end of the day. Not taking my backpack means I can utilize the personal shield to drastically improve my survivability versus many of the other support options that would compete with it. And its area denial, durable DPS, and damage over time effects create a unique playstyle that is both fun and unique to utilize. While it's certainly lost a lot of power via the convenience of roasting chargers through the leg in 2 seconds flat, I have to proudly state that I still use the Flame 40 and find it more than viable at a 7 out of 10 for the Terminids even after the nerf. Overall, the Flamethrowers in Helldivers 2, while they were much cooler and better designed in the previous patch, and I do hope we return to that, I have to say using them is still fun and unique and viable as far as the experience goes overall, even at the game's highest difficulty, where you would expect them to fail. They are certainly not the most convenient or conventional weapons in the game, but it's kind of rare that purely damage over time based weaponry is in general when it comes to video games. So while the nerf did a great disservice to the aesthetics of what makes a flamethrower, these weapons are still fun and I'll continue to use them regularly. Well, except the crisper. That thing is dog sh. Thanks for watching till the end and have a wonderful day. I'll see you next time.
And now, another helpful tip from General Brash.
Erevan has lit up the world like nobody else and shown us all just what our nerfed flamethrowers can really do! Except the crisper. For this, I am ordering all active Helldivers to like, comment, and subscribe to his channel. Failure to do so will put an invisible mine in your next dive.
Brash tactics. Use them or die trying.